We wanted to talk about El Greco's enormous canvas, The Burial of Count Orgaz. This is in a funerary chapel in a church in the city of Toledo in Spain. We've been looking forward to seeing this painting because we spent the week in Madrid looking at his work in the Prado.
El Greco takes some effort to love. And I think part of that is because we learn El Greco right after the High Renaissance, where we've looked at Raphael's School of Athens or Leonardo's Last Supper.
It's this really shocking transition. How could we go from the balance and interest in linear perspective and the rational to painting that at first seemed so scattered and distorted? What could possibly have happened? So let's look closely at the painting and try to understand how it's responding to the religious and the political environment in which this work is made. But before we do that, let's do a quick biography of the artist.
El Greco is born on the Greek island of Crete.
He likely worked producing icon paintings, part of a long tradition of Christian painting in this area.
But El Greco was ambitious. He moved from Crete to Venice.
Some of the most famous artists in the Western tradition were working at that time. Titian was working. Tintoretto was working.
One of the things that's very special about Venetian painting is its use of color. And this is something that we will see the impact of in El Greco's later work. From Venice, he goes to Rome, where he spends a few years.
And then he moves to Spain. Initially, he sets himself up in Madrid, but in short order, he finds himself in Toledo, this deeply religious city with a lot of churches and with a lot of opportunities for patronage. That is, people willing to hire somebody like him to paint images for the churches.
At this moment, art is being carefully controlled. This is a result of the Protestant Reformation started by Martin Luther in 1517. Luther's followers were troubled by the use of images within the church. They were concerned that people believed the images themselves were divine. And in the Protestant countries in Northern Europe, we actually see the rampant destruction of religious images. For Catholics, though, images were incredibly important for educating people and inspiring their faith. And the Catholic Church made a pronouncement on the correct use of images and insisted, somewhat vaguely, that from thenceforth they had to show the saints and religious figures and the stories of the Bible in very clear and legible ways. And there's a sort of chill that happens among artists. What does it mean to respond to these strictures? El Greco finds himself in this moment in the very deeply religious center of Toledo.
So The Burial of Count Orgaz is a really good example of a painting where the historical context is central to unlocking the meaning of the painting and unlocking the style of the painting.
Count Orgaz, better known as the Lord of Orgaz, the ruler of the town of Orgaz, lived in the 14th century, and a miracle occurred at his funeral. The sources tell us that as Lord Orgaz was being buried, St. Augustine and St. Stephen came down from the heavens. One of them took his feet, the other his shoulders, and lowered him into his tomb. Now they showed up because Orgaz had lived such a virtuous life.
That is, he had lavished a good portion of his fortune on the churches of Toledo.
For Catholics, good works helped you to achieve a place in heaven. And this was a stark difference between the Catholics and the Protestants. So one of the things that this painting is doing is reminding us that if you do good works, you will be rewarded with a place in heaven.
Count Orgaz, who's being lowered miraculously by these two saints who have appeared from heaven, is seen again being taken into heaven by an angel. And everybody in heaven seems to be paying attention.
We see God in heaven. On either side, we see Mary and St. John, and they are pleading his case. We see right next to Mary, St. Peter, who holds the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And we see saints and other biblical figures in the heavens, and ideally Count Orgaz will take his place among them.
Well, he seems to have a very good chance. After all, two saints have lowered him down into his grave, and Mary and John are awfully powerful advocates. What El Greco has done is he's given us a kind of frieze. All of the figures are pushed up to the foreground. There is quite a crowd.
These are all prominent citizens from the city of Toledo. So if you were a contemporary of El Greco's and you looked at this painting, you probably would have recognized these figures.
And if we look really closely, we can actually make out what we think is a self-portrait, the only figure that is looking directly out of the canvas.
And one wonders, what are all these 16th century people from Toledo doing in this scene of a miracle that took place in the 14th century?
There's a complete collapsing of time. Not only are these men witnessing the miracle of Count Orgaz, but the saints themselves are wearing clothing that would have been worn in the 16th century. So in terms of time, none of this makes sense.
In a way, this is a story that's been taken out of time and is a confirmation of an important Catholic dogma.
And to make that point especially clear, El Greco has painted a young boy just off to the left who looks out directly at us and points to Count Orgaz, seeming to say, learn this lesson, witness this truth. And it's a nice side note that art historians think that the boy who modeled for this figure was actually El Greco's son.
So one of the things that's often commented on about this painting is the difference between the way El Greco painted the earthly realm with that frieze of heads and these blacks and whites, and this explosion of colors and clouds and angular elongated figures and figures that are foreshortened in heaven above.
But there's also an explosion of color at the bottom of the painting. We have these brilliant golden vestments that are worn by St. Stephen and St. Augustine. And look at the way that they frame Lord Orgaz, who is represented beautifully in this suit of armor, and yet his body has this lovely S-curve as he's being cradled in the arms of these saints.
El Greco is certainly looking at images of the entombment of Christ being lowered into his tomb. So we have this analogy being made between Lord Orgaz and Christ himself. The armor that he's wearing is so reflective and so hard seeming, and it's in such contrast to the softness of the clouds in the heavens above.
But it's also in contrast to the softness of these large copes that the two saints wear, which are heavily embroidered. And in fact, within the embroidery, we can see that saints have been depicted. If you look closely at St. Stephen, at the bottom, you can see what almost looks like a painting that has been presumably embroidered into his cloak. And that shows the stoning that is the martyrdom of St. Stephen. And this is another signal that in the Catholic Church of the Counter-Reformation, the importance of saints are going to be underscored.
The idea of saints as intercessors between God and man was incredibly important for the Church at this time.
And we can see the role of intercessors directly depicted in heaven here, speaking on behalf of Count Orgaz to Christ so that he can be found blessed and enter the kingdom of heaven.
It's crowded. Most of the figures are pushed forward toward us, and spaces between figures are occupied by clouds, by angels.
And look at the angular way in which St. John is depicted. It further activates this already incredibly active surface. And this stands in such contrast to the emphasis on harmony and proportion that had been so important to artists in the Renaissance.
Well, for El Greco, who wants to make the miraculous real to us, he wants to engage us, to draw us in, to make us feel as though we are witnessing this miracle before us. Heaven is something which is constantly in flux. And in that way, it differs from the earthly realm below. Light is flickering, figures are moving, forms are foreshortened.
But there's something else going on here which I find so interesting, which is that the heavens are depicted so close above the heads of the men who stand on earth. There is a clear separation between the heavens and the earth here, but they are so close to each other. It's as if one of them could reach up. And in some ways, El Greco is anticipating where art is going to move in the following century. During the Baroque period, there will be a real emphasis by artists to reduce the separation between the heavens and the earth, to make the heavens a direct extension of the earthly sphere.
I'm just looking at the way that El Greco painted this. If you look at this yellow robe worn by the angel that's carrying the soul of Lord Orgaz, you can see these broad strokes of yellowish gold paint. And this idea that he's painting quickly and there's a feeling of inspiration, of energy that matches the miraculous subject that he's painting.
And so by looking at this painting, I think we can begin to see the way El Greco was fulfilling the concerns of Counter-Reformation Toledo. That is, his painting is about a kind of ecstatic embrace of the spiritual. It is making the glory of God directly accessible.